Well, welcome to the podcast today. My name is Jeff, and I am your host. And my guest today is Ruth Guggenheim. Ruth made Aliyah, moved to Israel from Baltimore, Maryland, 5 years ago to fulfill a lifelong dream of living in the Jewish homeland. Since then, she has worked for World Emunah, helping to raise awareness about the vital work of Emunah Israel on behalf of the disadvantaged, abused, and at-risk children and families of Israel. Ruth, welcome to the podcast today.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. And so before we jump in, we're going to talk a little bit about Purim today. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it that brings you to the work that you do, especially, in these last 5 years, moving to Israel and making Aliyah? How does that all come about?
So, Jeff, I was raised in a observant Jewish home. So I went to Jewish day school and Jewish seminary and learned all about my Judaism and practiced it. And, I studied a lot of the biblical perspective, the Bible and the prophets and everything. And I came to a point where I said, I don't just want to study this stuff. I want to live it, that this is my land. This is my Torah, the Bible, and that God gave it to us, and that watching it like a TV show isn't what it's all about. It's living it. It's being a part of the dream. It's being a part of the belief system. So I decided as a kid, basically, one day that when the time is right, God would open the doors and the opportunity for me to move to Israel. And 5 years ago was when those doors were opened, and I came. And never haven't looked back since then. I will say it's not always easy, so people shouldn't think it. We were all raised in different cultures, and people from North America, as you mentioned, I'm from Baltimore. It's an adjustment for sure. And even though it's coming home to my homeland and to the God-given Holy Land, to the Jewish people, it's still culturally very, very different than us Americans were raised. So that was a huge adjustment. But.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're working for this organization, World Emunah, and tell us a little bit about that and about the work that you do.
Okay, so first of all, Emunah is the Hebrew word for faith. And Emunah was started, actually, it's an amazing organization. First, I'll tell you, I didn't have this job when I came here. People always say, oh, did you have the job before you made Aliyah? No, I actually thought I had another job. And it fell through literally as soon as I got here. And that's also, I think, a part of God's plan. It was supposed to be for another organization that was also called Emunah, but it was a learning organization. And I was going to be their director of development and work with Anglos in America, because they were all Israelis and they didn't understand the mindset of Americans. So I said, okay, this is good. I certainly know development and resource development. So I'll work for Emunah, the Educational Resource Center. It all fell apart. And within 3 months, so I was directed to Emunah Israel, this huge humanitarian aid organization. And I was hired for World Emunah, which is the global development arm on behalf of Emunah Israel. And I just want to share one thing is like, within a few months, I all of a sudden, like one night I woke up, I had this epiphany, and it was like, obviously God wanted me to be at Emunah. I just had to go through another door first. Sometimes we don't always know how God wants us to get to where we are meant to be. But clearly I was meant to be at World Emunah, working on behalf of the people and children at Emunah Israel. So Emunah, again, which means faith, was started actually in the 1930s by a group of women, Anglo women, who were trying to save children from pre-Holocaust as Europe was starting to disintegrate and the Holocaust was starting to happen. In those years, the Anglo women, they wanted to save as many children as possible. So they started home shelters here, emergency shelters, and they brought children from various parts of Europe with the hope that one day they would see their parents again. They had faith that, this would all come to an end. Unfortunately, some of those children obviously never, ever saw their parents again. But that was how Emunah began. It began by giving shelter, humanitarian aid to children who were, from the Holocaust, and also from many Arab countries. A lot of people may not realize that in the 40s, especially prior to the modern day development of Israel, a lot of the Arab countries started to persecute their Jewish residents. So so there were a lot of Arab children that came to Israel to be saved. And Emunah grew from these humanitarian aid shelter homes for orphans and children, and ultimately ended up adding schools, counseling centers, therapeutic centers, all different opportunities, so that the goal was to empower people, to give them the faith in God and the faith in themselves, that they could walk away from their trauma and lead healthy lives. And that was really the onset of Emunah. Today, we have over 160 projects in the country. It is literally one of Israel's largest humanitarian aid organizations. It won something called the Israel Prize, which was given specifically as an organization to Emunah because of the impact that Emunah has had for generations on the people and society of Israel. So it's a phenomenal organization. It's literally, for me, a blessing to have gotten this and the opportunity to share what we do on behalf of Israel.
Wow, that is a great summary, and thanks for sharing that. I found it intriguing to learn that as you talked there, that this grew out of the challenges of the Holocaust. And I'll just make a segue here because we want to talk about Purim. The Jewish holiday of Purim is just around the corner. And this is a holiday that's based on the book of Esther in the Bible. And the story really is about how, Esther was instrumental in helping to avoid a Holocaust of another kind in that era. So just share with us from your knowledge, could you briefly tell us about the historical background of the Purim story? Where and when does it take place in history?
Sure. Okay, so it was also during the Babylonian exile, but after the destruction of the first holy temple that was built in Jerusalem by King Solomon. And when that was destroyed, the Jews were dispersed and went into exile. It's called the Babylonian exile. And it happened during that period, and the Jews were living in Persia. And what's actually very interesting, many may or may not know that Persia is modern day Iran. So we're looking at a country in today's generation that would like to see the annihilation of the Jewish people and of the land of Israel. And though they're not, the question has always been, are they direct descendants? And in reality, it's a different group of people. During that time, during the time of the Persian story, King Ahasuerus, who was the king over 127 provinces. It was like the largest kingdom in the known world at that time. It's very, very powerful. And he had a viceroy named Haman, and Haman was from the nation of Amalek. And if you remember the story in Deuteronomy, when the Jewish people went out of Egypt, when God saved us and we were in the desert, and it talks about that the nation of Amalek attacked the weak and the children and the weak in the back of the Israelites. Okay, you had the whole encampment, and it says that the nation of Amalek literally unprovoked attacked the Israelites. We have always held since then, and it's from the if you look it up in the book of Deuteronomy, the book chapter 25:17, it talks about that we should always remember that the nation of Amalek attacked the weak and the elderly and that from behind, and that always they would come to destroy the Jewish people. So we should always remember from generation to generation. And to this day, a part of the whole Purim story and the miracle behind the Purim story is that here was this man named Haman, who was from the nation of Amalek, our arch enemy. And he set up this whole thing where he pulled lotteries. The name Purim means lottery. So he pulled a lottery, and it said on the 14th day of Adar, the Hebrew month of Adar, the Jewish people should be annihilated throughout the Persian Empire. And King Ahasuerus went for it. So that whole story starts to evolve around literally, how are the Jewish people going to save themselves? And you have the story of Mordechai. Mordechai is supposed to be the uncle of Esther, okay? And Esther, you may or may not know, her Hebrew name was Hadassah. In the yes. Megillat Esther, in the story of Esther, it talks about that her name was Hadassah. She was taken in by Mordechai. And when the king had this great feasting and everything for 180 days. We talk about the distinction between Judaism and the culture there, where that culture was all about partying, about orgies, about sexuality, about the food and drinking and everything. 180 days of partying. And at the end of it, Vashti, his queen, who he wanted to come and to actually display herself in the nude, she refused. And it talks about how she got killed or she was excommunicated. But in reality, according to Jewish legend, she was killed. And then King Ahasuerus wanted another wife, another queen in his harem. And not that he didn't have a huge harem, he already did. But the story evolves about this is how Esther, this young woman, catches the eye, becomes a part of the harem, and is set up in the palace for a future time. And so Mordechai, her uncle, says, don't tell anyone when you get in there that you're Jewish. This is like, keep it to yourself for now. And we are told in the story that she leads a very quiet life in the harem and everything. She tries to maintain her Judaism privately and that. And then when this whole story with Haman and the plot that he's going to kill and annihilate the whole Jewish people, Mordechai goes to her and says, this is it. This is the reason you were set here. If not for a time like this is why God has put you in this moment. So that concept that Esther is there to save the Jewish people is something that we carry to this day. She and Mordechai work together. There's the whole story unfolds how she sets up and she has a party with King Ahasuerus, and she invites Haman, and it's two parties. And at the end, she shares with King Ahasuerus that Haman, this evil man, wants to destroy her people. And King Ahasuerus says, why does he want to do it? And she says, because we are all Jews. I'm a Jew. And at that point, this is where the whole story comes out. She's proud of who she is. She literally is set up to save the Jewish people. And then Haman is taken away. He has 10 sons, and they are all hung. It talks about where he wanted to hang the Jews, or he wanted to hang Mordechai. They are hung instead. And at the end, it says, Yehudim, Aitar, Arav, Simcha, V'Sason, V'Ikar, and the Jewish people had gladness and happiness. And the book continues that, they shared with each other shalach manot, gifts, and that to the poor. We give to the poor and we give to our friends. But the story sounds, Jeff, a little bit like fun and games, but the reality is it's one of the most powerful examples of how God works behind the scenes. If you read the story of the Megillat Esther, you'll know that God's name is never mentioned once throughout the whole Megillah. And in most of our religious books, as we know, the biblical books all have plenty of names, God talking, God telling this and that. But this was very specific because there's a concept around the Purim story called Hester Panim, which means his veiled face. Hester is a takeoff of Esther's name. So if you remember, I said that her name was originally Hadassah, which is a myrtle, smells nice. It's a real name, Hadassah. But when she went into the palace, she took over the name Esther. And it was alluding to the fact that Hester Panim, that God is going to be veiled, but in reality, he's very, very much present. And that's the message of the whole story of Purim for us, is that where we think things will go one way, the reality is God has his plan. And no matter what happens, sometimes God may appear to be veiled. We don't actually think we see him in history. Just like today, a lot of times people will look around and say, what's going on with anti-Semitism? What's going on in this country? What's going on in Russia? What's going on in Ukraine? What's going on in Iran again? Are they really going to try to destroy us? We don't really know what's going to be, because on some level, Hester Panim, God is veiled. But in reality, it's very easy to pull the drapes apart a little bit and see that God's hand is in every single thing. From the creation of Israel in the modern day creation in 1948 to now, we see miracles every single day. And that's the whole story behind Purim, is that God is not really hidden. God is here in all of our lives, and all we have to sometimes do is look for him.
Wow. Well, that's a great summary of the story, and it is one of the most fascinating stories in all of what we call the Bible. And it's just incredible to think, of this concept. I love the way you described this idea that God is veiled, and certainly, we've noted before that God is not mentioned in the story of Esther, but it is absolutely incredible to think about how that God placed her there in the palace. The phrase in English is "for such a time as this." That she was called to that moment in order to save her people, and I really appreciated your explanation. I think it helps a lot of people to understand not only the context and what's happening, but there are just so many parallels. And I referenced even the parallel to the Holocaust that actually did take place. In a real way, Esther helped to avoid a situation like that because of where she was placed in the palace. Now, Jewish people celebrate Purim still today. How do they do that? What's the celebration all about?
So it's obviously commemorating the great victory and the fact that God saved the Jewish people. So, but according to the Megillat Esther, in the end, it gives us some specific rules, so to speak. One is that we do hear the story, Megillat Esther, the story of Esther is read in, if you can, you go to synagogue to hear it read as a community. If you can't, you read it at home, but you read it the night of, and then the next day you're supposed to read it. And that's a commandment for us. The other thing, we are supposed to have what's called a Suda, a festive meal, because again, we're celebrating together. One of the things about the story too is when Esther, before she went to the king, I mean, I know we really gave a synopsis here, but before she went to the king, she told Mordechai to tell all the people, all the Jews of the land, to fast for 3 days. And they would fast and she would fast, and then she would go in front of the king. And the reason being is that we also know that if a king doesn't call you, you could be put to death. And for sure, in that time in history, if a king didn't want you to come and he had not called for Esther and he had not yet had a relationship with Esther. So she was like putting her life on the line. So she said, pray for me and fast. That was unifying the Jewish people. And one of the things about the Jewish people is when push comes to shove, and we have a lot of different opinions, but when push comes to shove, we stand united. Okay. And so that's a part of the story. So having a Suda, a festive meal together, being united, going and hearing the story together is a part of it. Having that festive meal, giving at least two shalach manot, means shalach to give gifts of food, because again, we're celebrating. So you give at least like 2 different kind of foods. It could be, fruit or cake or something. You give it to at least 2 of your neighbors or friends, sharing with them. And the other thing is matanot le'evyanim, giving gifts to the poor. We are obligated to give tzedakah, charity, that day to poor people. And that's how we celebrate today. The other way is like fun. A lot of people wonder, like, why do we get into costumes? If you follow, there's a lot of parades. Kids dress up, adults dress up. We go to the festivities and dress up. It's meant to be because, again, the story is Hester Punim. It's how things are not always obvious, how sometimes things are behind the veil, a mask. So the idea of wearing costumes is 2,500 years old. Is to dress up and to kind of like say, you might, you think you know me, but you really don't. I'm behind this mask. I could be something totally different.
Okay. That actually, that's one of the better explanations I've heard regarding the costumes. I think that's really great.
Another thing is, I'm sorry, when we read the story of in the synagogue and they call out Haman's name, Haman being the enemy, so to speak, we make noise. So you may know of the grogger. A grogger is a Jewish term for a noisemaker, and it's become customary that when his name is read to make the loud noise or beat on something, again, because we're trying to blot out his name. He was a real enemy, an arch enemy of the Jews, and he wanted to kill us, so we don't say his name. People actually do the same thing when they say Hitler's name. We say a phrase called Yamach Shemo, that his name should be blotted out. That when someone really wants to do true genocide of the Jewish people, so they should be blotted out.
I would definitely be in support of that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Now, what would you say are Queen Esther's or Hadassah? By the way, I have a niece named Hadassah. She's just a couple years old. No, just a year old actually.
Oh,
And so I'm familiar with the name. And of course we were before. And when our niece named her baby Hadassah, we were, pleased. Queen Esther. Esther is one of our favorite books in the Bible, my wife and I. So, but what would you say are Esther's most inspiring, outstanding characteristics?
the idea that she wanted to unify her people, and she understood at a given moment that she was being called upon by God. She was a very modest woman. Okay, she was beautiful. Clearly, she must have had tremendous charisma, and that she was blessed to become the queen at a time that was instrumental in saving the Jewish people. Yet she never, the fact that she even said, please pray for me and everyone should fast. It wasn't like she took it for granted, like with arrogance. Hey, I'm the queen, I'll do whatever. And clearly this is what God wants. She was very humble. She was a prophet. Okay. She was one of the prophetesses of the Bible. And she was blessed with this opportunity. And she was, it's interesting, her relationship with Mordechai. According to Jewish tradition, there's a whole concept of whether if she was really a niece or the wife. I don't know if you know that. And it's like for a whole biblical discussion, which I'm not.
Oh,
That's a whole other conversation, Jeff. Okay.
that's very interesting.
I think her great characteristics was seriously that she was even though she was clearly beautiful and charismatic, she was very modest, and she understood the power of God in her life. She had such faith ultimately at the end that she knew she could change history. That's a very powerful thing, but she was very modest about it. And I think that's a characteristic we all could take away, is the modesty. And even when we know that God has maybe sent us to do something and we have a mission, don't be arrogant about it. The goal is to be unified, to spread light in a modest way.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, Mordecai was also a very important player in the story. Talk a little bit about his role and how important that was.
So Mordechai was actually from the tribe of Benjamin, and some people say oh, that's interesting. Why was he from the tribe of Benjamin? Why not the tribe of Judah, which is, even though they were called Yehudim, which comes from the name Judah, Yehuda, he was from the tribe of Benjamin, and we learned that he was specifically given this honor around the Purim story because Benjamin was the only one of the sons that did not sell Yosef into slavery. Benjamin was not yet able to. Okay. So if you know the story, There were 10 brothers. There were 11 brothers at the time. Benjamin was not a part of the brothers that conspired and had him thrown in a pit, and then he went down to Egypt. That story. So that's why we're told that the tribe of Benjamin, their honor was given in this way through Mordechai, that he would save the Jews because of his ancestor, Binyamin. So, and he was also, he was a Benjamite. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was also very, very powerful. He was the head of the Sanhedrin, which was the great assembly, which during the Babylonian exile became the most powerful group leadership in terms of the Jewish people. They are the ones that, helped guide the laws and helped to maintain unity amongst the Jewish people in exile. So he was the head of that Sanhedrin. So very powerful individual, very modest also. The fact that he had the prophecy, he was given the blessing by God to hear the, what was going to be. He actually, outside the gates of the temple, of the castle, he heard the guards that were conspiring to kill King Ahasuerus. And that's a part of how the whole story unravels, because that's written in the book of Chronicles. And then it comes back later to Mordechai is rewarded instead of Haman. And when Haman sees that Mordechai is rewarded, it makes Haman even more jealous and everything. So again, he's a player where things look like Hester Purim. Again, you don't know up front what's happening in the story, but as the whole story unveils like an onion, one layer after another, it becomes very obvious what God wanted to do here. And Mordechai was a great, great man.
That's awesome. I love the twist in the story, when Haman is asked what should be done. What should be done for the person that the king would love to honor. And, he thinks it's about him. So he says all these great things. And then he has to watch while Mordecai gets all of this honor poured on him. It's just an
Right.
amazing
It's like your
twist.
nemesis, watching your nemesis get rewarded,
Yeah.
and when you think about it, it's political intrigue that happens. It happens today. It happens all the time. Think of politics. Think of politicians, how they're out to get the limelight, and when they think that they're going to be the ones rewarded by the president or the king or the Shah, whatever, all of a sudden it can all turn in 1 minute.
Hmm.
In less than a minute. And that's, again, the whole plot that God, he's watching over everything. He's setting the stage for whatever will be. So today, whatever politics is going on, Jeff, we better all look at it very carefully, because it's not just unfolding from the politician's point of view. There's something behind the scene.
Hmm.
And Mordechai was that perfect example, who appeared to be very quiet and innocent. He, ripped his clothes in mourning when he heard about the Jewish people that were going to be exiled, but he didn't just stand still. He realized this is why Esther is in the palace. He knew, he understood, and he made a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. You see any parallels between this story and events in the world today?
Way too many parallels. First of all, I think most certainly the Jewish community, and I would say the Christian world that loves Israel and certainly blesses the Jewish people, understand that there is a growing anti-Semitism. It's interesting. Many people, my parents included and grandparents, went through the Holocaust, and there was on some level of feeling that it would never ever happen again. History repeats itself. It does happen again, and there are messages behind why it's happening. Is this, the onset of Messiah? God willing, it is. We don't know, but so many things are happening. And the fact that Iran is doing what it's doing with, and their nuclear arms and this and that. I don't, why Iran of all the countries? That is Persia. That is that same country. And they are descendants of Haman, Amalek, that nation. And even though it's not, the true Amalek nation has been destroyed, but it's like the prototype. It's like the ongoing nemesis in society that unfortunately the Jewish people have every single generation. We believe and we understand that every generation there are those who want to destroy the Jewish people. Why? That's really up to God. But the fact that we are we are less than 1% of the world population, and yet everything evolves around Israel, around Jerusalem, and around the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good and bad. That's what I'm saying. It's a very powerful thing. And this is what the whole story was happening then during Persia. It was evolving around this little minuscule nation. Like, just leave us alone.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
can't.
No, those are some excellent insights. What are some of the lessons that we can draw from the story of Esther that we can apply to today?
I would say one biggest one is, like the organization Emunah, to have faith. That faith is a critical component to surviving day in and day out. Look, we all went through COVID, for instance, not to bring up a horrible thing, but, sometimes there are people who feel like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to make it through this? Well, the reality is we make it through a whole lot more, because if we put our minds to it and our hearts, and we know that some things happen beyond our control, because this is what God wants. This is what Hashem, what God is somehow like pulling the strings a little bit. Having that faith alone can make all the difference in the world. People who don't have faith crumble a whole lot easier. So one of the lessons is faith. You have to have faith. And also you have to believe that we have to stand united. When there is evil in the world, we must unite. Mm-hmm. Jew, Christian, non-believers, we must stand united against evil. And today, as we see evil unfolding all around us in every corner, if we, people who don't have faith and belief in something, if we don't unite, we're just going to implode.
Yeah. And I guess I would add one last one. If we're in a situation where we can step up and do something, we need to be ready to do that. We need to be prepared to be the man or the woman that that God calls us to be in the moment when it's required. Um, I think I would just add that as well. Now, we had you share a little bit at the beginning about your work, about World Emunah. I was pronouncing it wrong. I apologize for that. And you told us a little bit about how it got started and the work that you do. But talk to us a bit about Emunah Angels. When and why was this established, and what does Emunah Angels do?
Okay, so like 3 years ago, when Emunah Israel was, we were being contacted by Christian Zionists who loved Israel and would come to the land, and they would want to. It was really 4 years ago. They'd come because missions were still happening. They'd come and they'd want to see our homes and they'd want to donate and bless the people. Honestly, Emunah, which is a Jewish organization, was always run by observant Jewish people. They really didn't know what to make of it, to be honest. And they were a little bit nervous, like, oh, do we open our doors? Do we not? We don't want them to be proselytizing and witnessing to our kids and that. And how do we build relationships that are respectful, but have, their boundaries? And they honestly didn't know what to do. So when I started working at Emunah 5 years ago, when this happened like a year after I was there, I said, look, I've always been in dialogue with Christians. I've taught, I've learned with them. I used to work at organizations that did a lot of interfaith dialogue, and I'm very comfortable. And as long as we know how to dialogue and work together, we can make this all happen. So they said, okay, fine, you try to work on it. So I said, great. So let's start calling this Emunah Angels, the arm, the branch that specifically is building bridges between the Jewish and Christian community. We're like angels. We understand that our Christian brethren many times are like having our back. They're like standing behind us. They want to protect us. They want to be the guardian over us, especially as things are getting negative. And we understood that. So I said, you know what? Well, I'll actually tell you, there was a story. So I was speaking, one of the first times I was speaking in a church 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago. It was in Columbus, Ohio. I was invited to speak there, and it was a great time. It was called, the congregation had me. I spoke to them, and all of a sudden at the end, in the social hour, this woman comes up, and she's like crying, and she's standing. She says, the whole time that you were talking about Emunah and about Israel, there was an angel standing behind you. There was a 7-foot angel standing behind your shoulder. And I'm thinking, wow, that's like pretty powerful.
Yeah.
She said, yes. And because I saw that angel, I knew that God was with you and with Emunah. And this was her destiny to also become a part of the Emunah family. So because of this woman, her name was Laura, because she actually, and not your Laura, but because she actually said that she saw that angel behind me, and then she actually gave me, the next time I saw her, a little angel doll. I said, you know what? Let's call the Christian outreach group Emunah Angels. And that's literally it, because I really do feel that together we are working on behalf of God and behalf of his children. And that if you all are meant to be angels behind us, then so be it. And that was the creation of Emunah Angels. And we literally look at it like a family. We are looking to build these bridges. And again, it is about mutual respect and talking and having dialogue. And as long as we all can sit down and talk together, we understand how much more we have in common. And especially when it's the land, we're talking about Israel and the people and the children of Israel. We know that this is a part of God's eye. This is what he wants. So we are unifying and working together. And that is what Emunah Angels is about. So part of my goal, Jeff, is to go back to North America and to visit churches and communities and to have an opportunity to build these bridges together where we can.
Well, I think that's great. And if you're watching and listening today, either or, then we want to let you know how you can connect with World Emunah and with Emunah Angels. So, Ruth, give us some website addresses. We'll make sure they're printed on the video copies of this, but give us the web addresses where people can connect with you.
Okay, so the website is www.emunahangels.org or www.emunahisrael.org. You should know the Emunah Angels and Israel sites are identical. So if it's easier to remember emunahisrael.org, then you do that, or emunahangels.org. We do have a much bigger website called worldemunah.org. That encompasses everything, and that's a much more comprehensive website, but everyone's welcome to that. But the emunahangels.org is a concise website that gets you into the family, so to speak. And we have a Facebook page, Emunah Angels Israel, and an Instagram. And our Facebook page, it's been beautiful. I mean, started it about a year ago. We have about almost 5,800 followers, predominantly Christian Zionists from North America, and it's beautiful, And again, it's all about becoming a part of the family. And one thing, Jeff, if I can share, and you'll see it on the Emunah Angels website. One of the ways that we hope to build bridges is we come in and we do what's called a challah bake. Challah being the bread, the ritual bread that we eat on Shabbat, on Friday nights and Shabbat and holidays. Delicious egg bread, most people like it. And we have a booklet. We come into communities and we offer to the churches or synagogues to work together. We have like this fun, let's learn about baking challah together. Challah, and as you know, bread has far more than just the basic ingredients. All those ingredients, especially in Judaism, have spiritual symbolism. So when we do a challah bake, which is, again, fun, we actually learn how to bake the challah. We talk about what each ingredient means and how it means and relates to God and relates to the land and to the people. So we have... You bake it, you mix it, then it bakes and all that. And it can be a lot of fun. It can be great entertainment like at a church, and it can open up this dialogue and this opportunity to do family bonding. You have the parents come, you have the kids come, everyone does a challah bake. We sing, we dance. It's fellowship.
Yeah, I know it sounds really great. And just encourage you, if you're listening or if you're watching, go and check that out. And I would let you know that if you're listening, Emunah is spelled Emunah. So Emunah Angels would be Emunah Angels, ANGELS.org, or the other addresses. Make sure you include the H in there, just in case you're listening and you weren't really sure what that was all about. But Ruth, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Your insights around Purim and sharing about your work. I feel like we're going to be learning a lot more about that in the future. But God bless you, and thanks for being a part of the podcast today.
Thank you, too. Amen. Thank you very much for having me.